Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times, Prancy Pony Podcast production. I'm the Man of the West. It is time to wrap up Week 99 with Silmarillion Saturday. Now, these Saturdays are our chance to revisit the history and legends of the Elder Days, sometimes from the Silmarillion, sometimes unfinished tales, sometimes something else altogether. Now, last series, we laid a foundation for Tuor's arrival in Gondolin by reading of Maeglin and starting of the Ruin of Beleriand and the Fall of Fingolfin. And though we got Tuor through those gates just yesterday, we'll still have another week to finish his story. But there is a lot more material in the Silmarillion to flesh out that whole story, so we're going to take the rest of this series to finish up of the Ruin of Beleriand and the Fall of Fingolfin, so that we can get to the Nirnaeth Arnoediad in Series 14. Now, last time we read about Barahir's bravery and the flight of Imeldir with the women and children. Today, we move on to read of Sauron's capture of Tol Sirion. For nigh on 2 years after the Dagor Bragollach, the Noldor still defended the western pass about the sources of Sirion. For the power of Ulmo was in that water, and Minas Tirith withstood the orcs. But at length, after the fall of Fingolfin, Sauron, greatest and most terrible of the servants of Morgoth, who in the Sindarin tongue was named Gorthaur, came against Orodreth, the warden of the tower upon Tol Sirion. Sauron was become now a sorcerer of dreadful power, master of shadows and of phantoms, foul in wisdom, cruel in strength, misshaping what he touched, twisting what he ruled, lord of werewolves. His dominion was torment. He took Minas Tirith by assault, for a dark cloud of fear fell upon those that defended it, and Orodreth was driven out and fled to Nargothrond. Then Sauron made it into a watchtower for Morgoth, a stronghold of evil and a menace, and the fair isle of Tol Sirion became accursed, and it was called Tol Ingaurhoth, the Isle of Werewolves. No living creature could pass through that veil that Sauron did not espy from the tower where he sat. And Morgoth held now the western pass, and his terror filled the fields and woods of Beleriand. Beyond Hithlum he pursued his foes relentlessly, and he searched out their hiding places and took their strongholds one by one. The orcs, growing ever bolder, wandered at will far and wide, coming down Sirion in the west and Kellon in the east, and they encompassed Doriath. And they harried the lands so that beast and bird fled before them, and silence and desolation spread steadily from the north. Many of the Noldor and the Sindar they took captive and led to Angband, and made them thralls, forcing them to use their skill and their knowledge in the service of Morgoth. And Morgoth sent out his spies, and they were clad in false forms, and deceit was in their speech. They made lying promises of reward, and, with cunning words, sought to arouse fear and jealousy among the peoples, accusing their kings and chieftains of greed and of treachery one to another. And, because of the curse of the kinslaying at Alqualonde, these lies were often believed. And indeed, as the time darkened, they had a measure of truth. For the hearts and minds of the elves of Beleriand became clouded with despair and fear. But ever the Noldor feared most the treachery of those of their own kin who had been thralls in Angband. For Morgoth used some of these for his evil purposes, and feigning to give them liberty, sent them abroad. But their wills were chained to his, and they strayed only to come back to him again. Therefore, if any of his captives escaped in truth and returned to their own people, they had little welcome, and wandered alone, outlawed and desperate. To men, Morgoth feigned pity, if any would hearken to his messages, saying that their woes came only of their servitude to the rebel Noldor. But at the hands of the rightful Lord of Middle-earth they would get honor and a just reward of valor, if they would leave rebellion. But few men of the three houses of the Edain would give ear to him, not even were they brought to the torment of Angband. Therefore Morgoth pursued them with hatred, and he sent his messengers over the mountains. So even after the massive destruction and what can only be described as a near total defeat, the elves still managed to keep the orcs away from the western pass between Anfauglith and the rest of Beleriand. For those first 2 years, then, the only way that Morgoth's forces could get into the rest of Beleriand was to go all the way to the east of Dorthonion, to the March of Maedhros. Now, this pass was strategically important. Part of its defense was the Tower of Minas Tirith, not related, on Tol Sirion, the island in the middle of the river located there in the pass. But eventually, Sauron won. The island is now called Tol Ingaurhoth, the Isle of Werewolves. Recall, the Hoth ending is Horde, right? The orcs are the Glamhoth, the Din Horde, the Yelling Horde. So now Sauron has his eye, just the one big red one, of course, on the valley, and nobody can get through, as Beren and Finrod will discover, but that's another story. So now Morgoth can send his armies directly into Beleriand, causing all sorts of trouble. Elves taken prisoner, spies sent out to sow chaos, and catch that line, because of the curse of the kinslaying, these lies were often believed. Finally, we get the first bit about Morgoth and men trying to trick them. Oh, your problem is you're following those rascally rebels, the Noldor. But follow me, the rightful boss of Middle-earth. You'll be all good. This next bit is the root of so much. The houses of the Edain, they don't buy it. Even if they're tortured, they stay faithful. And so, as he does with anyone who won't bow down to him, Morgoth goes after them with hatred. Just as Sauron will later hate Elendil the Faithful. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. And folks, that does it for this week's Silmarillion Saturday. Thank you for joining me. Please come back next week as some new men arrive on the scene. And please visit patreon.com/Tolkien Times to learn how you can get an ad-free feed, bonus episodes, and become a part of my content council to help me decide what I'll talk about next series. Subscribe to the TTT in your podcast apps or to the PPP channel on YouTube, and be sure you're following @PrancingPonyPod on social media. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.